Welcome to another episode of Distory with Kate and Kirk. And today we are going to focus on the Skyway. So we're going to be venturing over to both Disneyland and Walt Disney World and focusing on the concepts through iteration to things that happened while the Skyway was still existing in Disneyland, and then, of course, its closure. And then we have some history of the Walt Disney World Skyway, and then that's where we are going to close it today. With me, as always, is the well-researched, very thoughtful, highly educated Kate, the Disney Cicerone. Kate, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. I actually really loved researching this episode because every time I post anything about the Skyway, everybody just like, oh, I missed the Skyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia there. Puns.
Yeah, and I think it's partially because of it was so beautiful to go over the park and get that bird's eye view that we no longer get from a lot of the parks anymore, where the Skyway used to be. So
some people miss it so much, they're willing to pay $72,500 to relive the Skyway.
Ooh, interesting little teaser there. So before we dive into specifically going to how this came to be, I do want to talk about why we even have a Skyway in the first place, which means we have to go back to Walt Disney, because it is in this era that Walt Disney was, pretty much everything in the park was Walt's idea, or people made it think that it was Walt's idea in order to get it constructed. So Walt Disney was traveling an awful lot in Europe in this particular era. We're talking about early 1950s Disneyland is where we're at in history. So Walt did a lot of travels in Europe during this time period. And there are some that say that he was trying to get away from his brother Roy. They were really not getting along in this particular period of time. Because you also have to think that this is around the time that Walt started really thinking of and dreaming about a theme park. And Roy was like, hey, we have this entire movie animation thing going on over here. This needs to be our focus. This is where our money needs to be. This is where our attention needs to be. This is how we're going to be financially successful, which we've struggled to be. And Walt's like, yeah, no, I want to go play with my trains. So because Walt was kind of trying to escape Roy at this point, and he was, running away to Europe an awful lot because they were just not getting along. Walt really wanted to focus on, this new theme idea for a little park for his employees, or his train that was back at his house. He really was very focused on toys and playing, and he just had moved on to a new era. His season was done with focusing, not that he totally focused on movies, but your attention kind of just gets bored after a while. So he spent a lot of time in Switzerland during this time. He was completely enchanted by Switzerland. And Walt and Lillian stayed in car-free Zermatt in 1952, and again for an extended stay in 1958, which is when they filmed the Third Man on the Mountain movie, which was lots of time in the Alps essentially spent here at this time. But this was when he decided to build the Matterhorn, which is a whole other story that we don't have time to get into right now. But essentially, he sent a postcard back to Wed, and he said, with the words on the back, build this. And that's how they got the idea for the Matterhorn was going to be their mountain. But anyway, how do we get specifically into, the Skyway? Well, of course, in Switzerland at this time, there are these gondolas that are in, all the ski chalets and things like that are transporting guests all over, or rather passengers all over the mountains there in the Alps. And so, of course, Walt Disney loved a busy, kinetic park. That was a big thing for him. He loved, things that had movement everywhere in his park. We can think of the eventual 5-layer cake of Tomorrowland that we got in 1967. We had the submarines, Autopia, the People Mover, the monorail, and then the Skyway eventually was added to the top. So all of those things there created this amazing kinetic 5 layers of movement that were happening in Tomorrowland at the time, which is sadly mostly missing today. There are some pieces of it that are still there. We still have the monorail. We still have Autopia. We still have the submarines, but we're missing some critical pieces of this. So Walt described the Skyway as a transportation system of the future for use in parking lots and huge shopping centers. So he wanted it to be an inspiration to other, urban planners, essentially, to incorporate it in so they could come to Disneyland and get the idea and then go back and take it to their communities and then integrate it, which is, of course, very much a precursor of what he wanted to do for Epcot. So we talked about that in our Epcot series as well. All right, Kirk, what do you got over there? You looks like you got some travels in the Alps.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add some context with what these looked like back in the 40s. I mean, they were horrifying, dude. Like, I would get in this thing. Like, I understand where Walt is coming from with saying it's the future of travel, but I don't know about that. I'm not getting in that thing. That is scary. Downright scary.
Well, you ever see like those ski lifts where like there's just like a tiny little bar and some slippery wood that you're like sitting on, and it's like you're like hundreds of feet up?
Yeah, T bars for skiing. Yeah,
that looks terrifying. I don't know how people do that.
It's, yes, also scary. But, listen, if you're great at skiing, all these things are normalities at this point. Although they're still pretty inefficient, so it must be a really old slope if they still have those ones and doesn't get a large capacity, because a lot of the newer places have, or even older places who are just successful, have really innovated with those. Like, some of those are so fast, it's like crazy.
So Walt was a collector of ideas and cool things that he saw. And he's like, hey, that looks really neat. Let's bring that back home and then, show the world. So, that's where we get the Skyway from.
So when Walt was over there looking at the possibility of bringing one of these gondola systems, the company itself, Von Roll, which is a Swiss manufacturer of ski lifts back then, they now do a lot of like electrical installation. It's very boring company now. They don't do attractions anymore. Fun fact, though, there is still Skyways in existence around the country, which I'll get to at the very end. But according to the book, The Disneyland, The Nickel Tour by Bruce Gordon, Walt was so intrigued by the possibility that he bought one before he even knew where it would go. Which,
yeah,
that's wild to me, like, to make such a big capital investment in something that you're like, I don't even know where in the park this is going, but we need it, which I think is cool.
Yeah, that's definitely Walt to a T. I think that's when he bought that petrified tree, right, for Frontierland. He's like, I don't think he knew where it was going to go, but he's like, we just need this for the park.
Yeah, I love that.
So I just want to talk about what is the Skyway just a little bit before we kind of dive in here. So the Skyway in Disneyland opened June 23rd, 1956, and it traveled between Tomorrowland and Fantasyland and provided an unobstructed preview of all four of Disney's realms, which I think is a really fun way of putting that. It helped guests orient themselves and plan their day was its purpose in Disneyland, and also gave camera fans exceptional angles for their snapshots. The publicists agree that they those are actual words from like how they.
It's like their pamphlets or something, like a press release. Oh my God! Hang on.
About it.
Oh my God, you have to read that again. I need to hear this.
So they helped guests orient themselves and plan their day, and they gave camera fans exceptional angles for their snapshots.
Okay, hang on, time out. I will say this. This is from, so I did find a new website that I am in love with. It's called Theme Park Brochures, and it's just an archive of every single map of every single park in America, and I am in love with it. And there's no year left out. Not the best coverage, but what I did find out is when you're looking at Disneyland's map, they don't tell you anything about the park.
Opening year one is terrible. Yeah.
The only thing that they told you about was food, was where to get food and where bathrooms were. But like this, if you're looking at this map, all of these like A, C, B, H, D, G, F, all they are correlating to is the lands. That's it. So there's no other information. So like you're like, okay, that rocket thing looks interesting. Let's go to that. So the concept of like God, I don't know how to say this.
What?
Pictorial weenies to pull people into a map. They clearly used in the art here because I don't know how else you would know where to go because you wouldn't. I'm getting very hot. My face is very hot right now.
I was not expecting you to say that.
And it's like accurate. It's like it's accurate on to what Walt would have called them.
It's true. A visual hook, right? Like that is exactly how that map went down in 1955. And I think partially the reason why that map is so scarcely populated with what it is, I think there's a couple of reasons for it, but I think the main one was probably time. I don't think that they had a lot of time. And by this point, they're scrambling to get stuff built in Disneyland. And they probably didn't even know what exactly was going to be open on opening day. There was a lot of things that they weren't even sure were going to be ready. So I think that that's why this map is so vague, I guess, is the best word for it, as to what attractions are available, because they didn't want to promise, like, hey, go see this attraction in this land and have it not be ready, not open, not there, right?
Yeah, the truth is it's not until the 1960s that you get an actually highly detailed map that tells you where to go and what to grab and what to look at beyond food and refreshments and restrooms.
Mm-hmm. And also the other part of it is, they want you to have an adventure too, and so that there's a little bit of that where they want you to go and explore, and they want you to take the train tour, the Grand Circle tour, and kind of see things you want to see that way. And also with the Skyway, once it was installed, that was another way you could have a preview and see what you wanted to go back and visit later. So anyway, let's do a little bit of concept art for this particular attraction here. Let's dive into that. I found this one that was Bruce Bushman, very clearly Bruce Bushman, his style. If you remember that he designed lots and lots of things in Fantasyland, and this really does kind of look like what we end up getting later on with these metal buckets.
Circular. So, I mean, they call them buckets, and you can tell right here from the concept art, it's because they're cylindrical in nature and it looks like it's hanging. So it's very much like a pail would be. So sky buckets were the colloquial term, even though it was the Skyway.
Yeah, Bob Gurr calls it the bucket ride, if you ever hear hair about that.
And Bob Gurr ruined the bucket ride, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I have another one which shows... I get the Fantasyland station.
Yeah, which I would, if you don't mind, I'd love to pause on that and come back to that, because I have a whole history of that station where I'd love to come back and revisit.
Yeah. I mean, this is just what it looks like when they didn't have it. So
there's also this poster, See Disneyland from the Air, Skyway. This one's pretty famous. A lot of people have seen this one before. They also used this one when they did the throwback night. They made it a photo op, which I got to sit in. Please stay, listen.
It's amazingly funny. You're in the poster, dude. How big was that thing? That stand-up had to have been at least almost 15 feet because of the scale of you. Do you know what I mean?
They have the best photo ops in this particular event, and I really hope they bring them back. Yeah, it was really fun. And so they did use some of this...
Wait, hang on. Put that back up. It's identical. There it is.
I'm pretty much that lady.
You are that lady. Although, yeah, you're a harlot with short sleeves. I don't know what you're doing. The Amish would not approve, Kate.
Oh, gosh. So when they were building all of these things in 1956, you remember at Disneyland at this time, they're like preview of a ride that was coming, a coming attraction. Instead of having construction walls with concept art on it like we do today, we have these little storybooks that they would put out in front of the attraction to tell you what was going to be there. And so they did have one for the Skyway as well. It says Ride the Skyway to Tomorrowland, and it shows kind of ish Tomorrowland station, and then you taking off. But this was the one that was in Fantasyland. It says See Disneyland from the Air. Okay, so I have a little bit about the design. So we talked about how Bob Gurr calls it the bucket ride. Imagineer Dick Stein was the one that designed the 42 spun metal gondolas. And I had to look up spun metal because I was like, that sounds like a very technical engineering term. Like I don't know what that's about. And so basically it's spun aluminum. So metal spinning is a metalworking process where you have a disc or tube of metal is rotated at high speed and then formed into a symmetrically made part. So basically there's a mold. They use force to shape a sheet of metal or over a mold. So you'll have something that's like here, like this is our mold, and then you'll have this flat sheet of metal. They'll use force to kind of like slowly like shape it like this. It almost looks like clay. It's really fascinating to watch them do it. And then it'll become like, a bowl or a shape or whatever you want it to make. And so that's how they made these particular buckets is it's all spun metal. So it was like one sheet of like aluminum, but then they like molded over something to make these buckets.
It reminds me of like vacuum forming. So vacuum forming is really popular, especially with plastic and molding. But it's obviously got to be a lot. I wonder how thick the metal has to be originally, because as you're forming it, it would get thinner in spots. That's like a really unique process.
Yeah, it is.
I like how and Kate did an excellent job of going, you go like, this is the metal, and then you put it on your fist, and then now you have a fist. You have fist metal. It's pretty good, dude. I understood what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, that was the best way to explain it without showing an actual video, which I did watch like a 15-minute video of how they do that. I was like, I don't think they need this level of detail. So I backed it up a little bit. So inside each bucket, there was actually, this is one of my favorite parts, there was 2 patio chairs that they bolted to the floor. It was literally just 2 chairs. They didn't manufacture them specifically for the buckets. They just put some patio chairs in and then and bolted them down so they couldn't. Oh, here, I have a great picture of it here. So you can see the patio chairs. They're just hanging out in the bucket.
That is wild.
Yeah, right? Because they were just inventing these things at the time. The number of buckets could vary depending on the need, how many they needed on at any given time. I have a really fun one of backstage with all of them all lined up. But there was 18 to 44 buckets, so it depends on how many they put on at any given time. Like Kirk said, they were built by the ski lift builder Von Roll Rope Works at that time of Bern, Switzerland. And November 18th in 1955, John Hench was the one that was working with Von Roll engineers to finalize the attraction. But this was the first Von Roll Type 101 aerial ropeway in the United States. So they used new components as well as used equipment from a couple of places. So this was actually a really fun little rabbit hole that I went down, Kirk, because not all the pieces were manufactured just for Disneyland. They got some of the pieces from them. One of them was from the 1955 Rotterdam Fair, which I think was like a World's Fair from what I could tell, which focused on energy and reconstruction and rebuilding. Essentially after World War II, right? It was a few years past that, but I actually found video footage of this fair where they show a Skyway type ride, but it looks a little bit more like one where you have like a ski lift. But I wonder if some of the component parts from the top, they took that for the bucket ride, so to speak, to hang them on the cable. So this is actually photos from the Rotterdam Fair from 1955, which is crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I couldn't find one from the German Federal Garden Show in Kassel, West Germany. So garden shows are a way to intended to show how you can improve your quality of life and also the ecological climate in the cities. So they had this particular show in West Germany at this time. They planted beds of roses on top of rubble heaps left over from World War II, which is crazy. But they did get some components for the Skyway from that as well. And I couldn't find many pictures of that. I did find some of the actual gardens and whatnot that they planted for the fair. And then you can see there's some structures there as well. But this one was actually pretty interesting. I think this one is actually from the Rotterdam Fair. And look at those buckets. Don't they look awful lot like the ones that we have?
That looks identical to what we finalized in Disneyland.
Mm-hmm. So
I like that little molecule thing in the background too. That's pretty cool.
Oh, I know, right? The shape of it. Well, you can see so many of those influences came back to Tomorrowland at Disneyland, right? the kind of futuristic look. Yeah, the buckets themselves, though, the shape of them almost identical to what we end up getting at Disneyland. Do you happen to have a photo you can pull up of the Disneyland version? WED designers, designed their buckets. They really not a creation from somewhere else.
Design. It's basically, here's the deal. It's Von Roll and Hensch basically were like, let's just do this thing, Yeah. Like, it's basically a manufacturer who's producing these. These aren't really necessarily like a Disneyland spec,
No. This did hang from a stranded cable that was 1,250 feet in length. It had a 35,000-pound counterweight to keep the cable tight that was located in the Tomorrowland section, which we'll talk about in a minute, and was supported by 4 brace towers. The tallest tower was on top of something that we call Holiday Hill. If you're familiar with Disney history, you know all about Holiday Hill, but it was made from the dirt that they excavated for the moat for Sleeping Beauty Castle. They basically piled it in a gigantic pile and then planted some landscaping onto it and then nicknamed it Holiday Hill. So you'll see these really tall tower that was 60 feet tall was on top of Holiday Hill, which Walt hated, and we'll get into that too in a little bit. But the one-way trip on the Skyway took 3.5 minutes. And I believe you only went one way from everything that I saw. There was no round trip option.
Originally, when it started out, it was a one-way, and then eventually you could buy a round trip ticket. And then it was only until much later on that it became only a round trip when they were redesigning Fantasyland in the 80s. And then it went back to a one-way. So it actually was like split. There was a couple of times where it was one way and there was a couple of times where it was round trip.
Interesting. I don't think I found any information on that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I do have a note about some maintenance problems that they had with this. This was an electrically driven Skyway. But Bob Gurr recently shared a really fun story on his social media accounts where he said that they used a Volkswagen motor whenever it broke down in order to get guests back. So they didn't have to, get the cherry picker and get guests off of the Skyway. So they would hook up this Volkswagen motor to the drive, and then they would power the buckets. And he said it would literally drive you home, which I thought was really fun.
Well, there were times where the fire department would actually come out. There was a cast member, I was watching a video, a cast member was recalling when they were working on the submarines and it inexplicably broke down. And the entire night until 3 a.m., they were using cherry pickers to pull people off of the buckets.
Oh, man, that's crazy. I don't think I've heard about that. Another thing that Bob Gurr said that they have a problem with, and I love his technical term here, he calls it the gripper. He says the gripper that grips the cable was always wearing out, and they had to keep replacing the gripper. So the thing that would actually hold on to the cable and move you around would wear out.
This is just like an uncoupling of what one looks like. So,
oh yeah,
a little bit of it. Yeah, isn't that cool?
That's cool. Aw. Now I'm sad that we don't have this.
Well, you know what's funny is, did you notice anything unique about these buckets? Now, this is anything different. Yes. That ends up being a point of contention here with our Skyway buckets in the future, but we'll talk about that later.
So you could take a ride on the Skyway for a D coupon, which was 35 cents at the time.
Cheap, giving it away. The very specific type of this Von Roll Skyway was a Type 101 detachable monocable aerial ropeway system. Okay,
so let's go and talk about the two stations. Let's start with the Fantasyland, and what they called it was a Sky Station was the name for it. Also, Bob Gurr referred to it as the Western Terminus for this. So this was designed like an ornate Swiss chalet, which was a tribute to the Von Roll company because they were made in Switzerland. Possibly designed by Bill Martin, although it was really hard to find information about specifically how this was designed. The Alpine style of buildings was very, very popular in ski resorts during this era. So this was very common, something you'd see in Sun Valley, Idaho, or Lake Arrowhead in Southern California. So this wasn't a new thing that Disney invented, this Swiss chalet design for, this has obviously been around. All right. So you can see here, this is when it's under construction. You can see Dumbo right in front of it there. But Kirk has the original concept art for what this was supposed to look like as well. So I want to talk about the exterior of the chalet a little bit because the design here is really fantastic. They did say that outside there was some magical cuckoo clock that would come to life. Did you find anything about a cuckoo clock anywhere, Kirk?
The only thing I can think of is this center location. So if you look at the top center of the chalet, it has space what I would deem a location for a cuckoo clock in the dead center above the entranceway. But that's the only spot I can think. I don't see another location.
It's something else. Yeah, no. So outside and around it, before we get to the building itself, there is an alpine garden that was designed by Bill Evans and the landscaping team. So the entrance facade, I found all this information about this, and my architecture knowledge is a little bit limited, but I do know that it's a jerkin head gable, which is on the outside of it, with the roof transitioning to a hip style with spires at the ridge as well. So you can see all the spires on the top of it. But the interesting thing about this building is that every flat surface is decorated with symbols. And so I had a fun time kind of investigating the symbols for this. And so I was like, okay, well, what are these symbols? Did you look this up at all, Kirk?
They look like flags and regional areas, but I did not look it up.
Yeah, so these are the 26 cantons or states of like Switzerland. So
there you go.
Swiss coats of arms, which were
Swiss coats. They're probably very warm.
But you can see them here as well. And I looked up all of the different parts of it, and so here's what they look like. Here, this is all of them. So that's what was on the outside, was all the different states of Switzerland. Then if you look up above these, you'll see this giant symbol that looks like a sun and the moon with some zodiac signs actually circling it, which is so interesting. I was like, I don't remember ever seeing something like that where we could see the zodiac signs. Here's a closer look so you can see what it looked like up close. And so I kind of went down a little bit of rabbit hole as to
what's up with the comet that's barreling down on us. Are we okay?
It's gonna hit.
Is this like doomsday stuff?
So I went into why in the world does this kind of art exist? Because if you look also inside of this building, you'll see this really beautiful kind of like circle scrolly kind of art. And my journey took me to some barn stars for the Pennsylvania Dutch, which was a very interesting place to go to. But some of them emigrated from Switzerland. So if you are ever in Amish country and you go and you see barns and they have these like really beautiful symbols on them, this to me looks so much like this Alpine style. I was like, okay, well, are these connected? And they are. And so basically they draw upon celestial imagery blended with floral geometry. And the floral patterns, they would combine things like lobed points, raindrop shapes in a variety of configurations, and borders suggesting the petals of a blossom. So I'm going to go back to that shot that we have of the inside of the chalet, and you can kind of see that these things have 4 points on them, right? So the 4 points represent different things. One is 4 seasons, or it could be a compass, or the 4 points of a cross if you want to get religious with it. But the idea is like all of this stuff was inspired either by flowers or celestial, things. So that's where I think we have this, on the outside, this zodiac comes from, as well as this connection to the celestial imagery that was very common in even in Switzerland. So I was like, okay, so we're obviously not talking about the Pennsylvania Dutch. We're talking about like, what do these buildings actually look like in Switzerland? So I went back and found this really interesting building that is in Switzerland. And this is, I'm going to mispronounce this like crazy, the Blumlisalp Chalet.
Obviously.
Constructed in 1571. It's in, I'm going to mispronounce all of this. I should have looked it up. Sorry. at the Ashi, the Canton Solothurn in Switzerland. So this is a decorated folk house with sunburst and rosette patterns on it. And the thing that I think is really interesting is if you look at they do have these patterns at the top of these circle things that kind of look like what we get in our chalet. But if you look at the bottom, there's all these words that are kind of scrolled across the bottom. And this in particular one says, "Highest Lord above us, with your graceful hand protect our house and village from sickness, storm, and fire. Amen." The inscriptions served as a public dedications of establishment and blessings of a house and its occupants. So, do you see where I'm going with this, Kirk? Have you figured it out?
No, not at all. What are you doing?
So there is one, there's an inscription that is also on this one as well. And I found it first in this picture, which is just like really, it's so almost so hard to see. You can barely see it. It's the very top. It's really almost cut out. So there is an inscription that's on the outside of the chalet. Okay. And then I eventually found a photo where I could see more of it, which here's part of it. You're going to figure this out real quick.
No.
Okay. It's part of it. So it says, "Up above the world, you."
Oh, fly. Like a tea tray in the sky.
The sky. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love that. That's so fun.
Yeah. So they have the little, words
You needed,
from
you
Alice
know
in
where you
Wonderland.
messed up? You messed up because you weren't going,
Up above the world you fly, like a tea-tray in the sky.
I did.
I needed the falsetto. So
I'm sorry.
you're like, up above the world you fly.
I'm sorry. I failed you there. So this was inscribed on like the part where
That's so
you
fun.
actually exit the chalet with your bucket. It was on the outside of that. There's also some flower pots and whatnot there as well. I'll pull that one back up because I think that's a really interesting part of that. But then the interior of this house, do you want to walk us through the interior? Do you have some photos of that?
I mean, I have photos of them walking through. This is the exact same spot where you were at.
Yeah.
But I don't know exactly, like, because this is all the empty sections. So,
Yeah, I have
like, this is all where it's taken up.
I have photos of like what it looked like after it kind of became defunct and they no longer use
Right.
it.
It's just empty. There's not a lot, like,
Stays.
inside.
No, because it
That's
was super
Tomorrowland.
dark inside. So the sides were left open as possible, but the dark wood and lack of skylights created a fairly gloomy interior space. So it really was like not very well lit in there. I think that's why we don't see very many photos of it. But it did have open framing, a concrete floor, and an industrial electric motor drive, which made it extremely hard to converse inside because it was very noisy. So you can imagine it very acoustically live inside this building because there was nothing that was muffling the sound in any way. Hopefully those ear protection.
I do like the woodwork. Ear protection? Dude, in the 50s? Were you crazy?
I know, I'm just joking. But it's just, yeah, and sadly, I'm sure they did not. You can kind of see some views of what it looked like, if you're looking into it from where they're landing and taking off, but it is pretty dark in there, so you don't get to see very much. But anyway, that's pretty much what I've got for the Fantasyland Sky Station. Do you have anything more you want to share about that, Kirk?
No, I love that. It's so cute, and I think it's very beautiful.
Oh, I do have this.
But now we have Batu, so that's great.
Yeah. So I feel like I just also have a picture of the cast members wearing lederhosen at some given time. They had that going on, so that's fun. And they painted, those pots were all painted, the flower pots behind him, which is fun. So, all right, should we move on to the Tomorrowland station?
Tomorrowland.
So we talked a little bit about what was next to this in our Thanksgiving episode this year, which is the Stratosnack Space Bar. This was essentially right next to it, to the left of the Stratosnack Space Bar, which was an automat. And it was kind of above Richfield Autopia. Richfield was an oil company that sponsored Autopia. So you can see at the Skyway station. This was just kind of a simple outdoor station with a cover that was designed in what they call the international style. So I also try to look up who in the world designed this kind of kinetic sculpture that we have here that I'm I'm assuming this spun around. You see all the like different components, these little almost look like paper, but they're not made of paper, obviously. But they're like, I'm trying to describe. How would you describe those, Kirk? You're better with me at describing things.
Well, no, it's so the paper things almost have a texture that's concave, which would allow wind to make them spin. So I feel like they're supposed to be catching the winds. But then there's the center sections that are just slotted, which I don't think those turned. I just think that things on the poles spun actively.
Yeah. The things in the center are more these like triangles that some of them are inverted and some of them are not. And it's a very primary color theme with blue and yellow and red.
It's
or orange.
Obviously not the time period, but it reminds me of some of the kinetic things for Small World with Raleigh Crump. It gives me that vibe, even though it isn't.
Yeah, me too. Which, Walt really enjoyed those kinds of things, and that's why he kind of pulled Raleigh onto a lot of things. So, anyway, they had a railing. The railing here is really interesting, which is a sentence I've never had to say.
Say that to... there's a railing that I think you'll find fascinating. Great. What did it do? Kept people in? They could hold her with their hands?
So do you see this railing here? It has a very interesting design. And this was it was based on I want to say it's a sine wave from an oscilloscope. So
okay.
I'm like, what is an oscilloscope? Okay, let's back it up a little bit. So an oscilloscope is an electronic test instrument that graphically displays varying voltages for the purpose of capturing information on electrical signals. So basically allows you to see how voltage changes over time. So it's got like a wave pattern to it. So if you almost think about like, the machine that like it'll track like your heart rate and it will like bounce up and down. It looks very similar to that. And so that is how they ended up designing this railing, is based off of that design. So yeah, I mean, who knew that we were going to talk about railings today, but that's where we're at. Who designed this particular building? I could not find an exact person who designed it. There's a couple theories out there. WED's first architect was Carl Denny, who was hired in 1956. So that was the time that this was actually being built and constructed and made. But he kind of got pulled aside to design Walt's vacation house instead of projects for Disneyland. So it's unsure if he did this. The architectural firm Pereira and Luckman maybe was consulted, because Walt talked to them about Disneyland in 1953, and he designed the Disneyland Hotel as well. But because of this international style, which the focus is on the horizontal plane of the roof that appears to be floating. That's kind of what defines it as its international style. But this is very much in the style of Bill Pereira. So there's speculation that he was involved in the design somehow, but I have not seen concrete evidence for it. So that's the best I got for that. So anyway, really interesting kind of looking building that very much echoes what Tomorrowland was all about at that given time. Kirk, do you have anything you want to share about it?
No.
I do have a song.
Dude, you're very thorough today. You're into this. This is like your realm is like Disneyland old transportation.
I know.
I'm living for it. I know it is.
I do have a sign here that's in Tomorrowland that will be relevant later, but it says this ride does not accommodate wheelchairs. And you can see that I don't know if that guy's holding it or I think he's just behind it. But
yeah, I think he's behind it.
But there's just stairs up and down from this platform, which
this was also before the ADA compliancy, so none of that stuff existed before the American Disabilities Act.
So there was a major addition, a major change to this attraction that happened when they added the Matterhorn into it. And this Matterhorn opened in 1959. So Walt hated the central support pillar for Holiday Hill, which I mentioned earlier. He said that he called it an eyesore because it was essentially one of the highest points in Disneyland, was this giant dirt hill with some landscaping and this giant 60-foot tower on top of it, right? Now, Holiday Hill, we've talked about this before, but it was kind of an interesting place because it was like full of these walking trails and picnic areas, but it also was really hard for them to like security to keep track of because it was such a vast area and had a lot of nooks and crannies. So it was known as kind of like a makeout for teenagers. And it was also a place where a Disneyland employee decided to grow some very special plants on one side of the hill, and plants that you weren't supposed to be growing. I'll just say that. And they found, when his supervisor found out about it, of course he was fired, and they took the plants out. But that's how big this area was, is to illustrate it, that somebody could be planting and growing their own little mini farm of some special plants, and nobody really knew it was there for a while. So Holiday Hill, basically needed to go, and they were trying to figure out what in the world to put here for a long time, which again is Matterhorn history, which we just really don't have time to get into right now. But
I guess that's why they call it the happiest place on earth.
For that guy, it was, I guess.
Yeah, he was living the dream, dude.
So yeah, you can see all the little walking trails and whatnot here. The Matterhorn then was designed to be built in place of Holiday Hill. And as Bob Gurr said, they hung the Skyway from the Matterhorn on the inside. So once they constructed it, they created 2 channels essentially for these buckets to go through the center of the Matterhorn. And I love this. A kid once asked Walt Disney why his mountain has holes in it. And he answered, because it's a Swiss mountain.
Yeah, like Swiss cheese.
Yeah. I also love the snow on these early Matterhorn pictures. The snow is so not realistic to how it is now. But interestingly enough, so inside this place where it goes through the center, they had a name for this. I have a picture of it. It wasn't enclosed yet. Okay. At this time, you could just see the Matterhorn, you can see the Matterhorn cars basically going up the lift on the inside. And they called this the Glacier Grotto in the guidebooks, which didn't look anything like a grotto. It looked like the inside structure of the Matterhorn. But
there was no theming.
This one's a really good one where you can see specifically them going up and the Skyway going above the roller coasters cars. So this wasn't actually made into a glacier-like grotto until 1978, and that's when the caverns were added to it, and that's also when we got the abominable snowman. So if you're ever standing in front of the Matterhorn and you see this like cast of a footprint that is there, and then it will say it says May 27th, 1978, because that's when they enclosed that area and they added the abominable snowman to the attraction. So that some people have asked me, why does it say 1978 here? And I'm like, that's why. It's because that's when they added him. They did close the Skyway for the construction of the Matterhorn, obviously, because they had to put it right through the middle of this gigantic building. But then the Skyway reopened alongside the Matterhorn and the motorboat cruise and the submarine voyage and the monorail system in 1959. Basically, they had a second reopening of Disneyland, is what they called this, when there was this massive expansion in Tomorrowland. And that's when it started to go through the mountain. So, all right, Kirk, do you want to talk about the new buckets that we get in 1965?
Sure. So the biggest problem with the buckets that we currently have are their patio chairs. No, it's the fact that there's 2, right? Yeah. So you can only fit 2 people. So how on earth do we add more capacity? Well, you add more seats. So this is when we get Bob Gurr coming in to help add capacity. So he took the original gondolas and replaced them with rectangular 4-passenger models, which could only weigh a few pounds more than their predecessors, because you got to remember the way the spec for these cabling was, they would fall out. It would really make the cable drop if it was too weighted. 1, because of the weight of the passengers, and 2, the size of the vehicles to accommodate more guests. But the new gondolas were made of ABS plastic with steel frames, which then allowed them to 1, cut weight, and 2, allow 2 guests to face forward and 2 guests to face backwards. And this is why I said earlier that Bob Gurr ruined the Sky Buckets. Now, buckets only because of the shape, but not that he ruined the Skyway, because he actually made it a lot faster to get on the Skyway. So that's actually a positive thing. And Bob Gurr, if you're really into Bob Gurr, as of right now, December 6, 2024, Bob is still alive, and he's still signing a lot of like original artwork and posters. And so you can actually purchase a Bob Gurr autographed Skyway bucket poster if you want, right on his website. So, and that helps support him and his foundation.
He has some really neat tours and stuff you can go on as well in the LA area, where you can actually go with Bob Gurr to all these historic sites and hear the stories and stuff. So very interesting opportunities if you are a Disney history fan. It's interestingly enough, I found so many of these, Kirk, are photos where they have both the old and the new styles operating at the same time. I don't know if you ran into that. So
it was occasional. It's weird when you see it because you're not expecting it, the juxtaposition of both of them.
Right. So it seems like there was a period of time when they ran both of them at the same time, which would make sense if they wanted to do like, capacity. Oh, there's 2 people in this one and 4 people in this one. But over time, they phased out the 2 buckets completely.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense. I wonder if they combined guests, because that probably wasn't common to combine parties if needed.
Yeah. Oh, I do have a picture of what it looks like once it got enclosed in 1978. So completely different than being able to see those Matterhorn cars below you. So in the 1983 Fantasyland remodel, they only made round trips from Tomorrowland, like you said before. And I actually so my family went in, this must have been 1986. I'm going to age myself here. I was 2 years old, and my family went, and my wonderful grandpa took his beta camcorder, and here's actual footage from my pappy taking this. And I don't know if I was in this car or not, because they didn't do any video footage of me at all. But you can see this very shaky camcorder footage from 1986, which is exclusive to that's probably my brother, because
I love this.
He's 4 years old.
Dude, this is like Ride POV 101. This is incredible.
Yeah, that is I think that might be my grandpa. I wonder if somebody else had the camera at that point. But we're going over Fantasyland. Yeah, isn't that cool? So
that is so cool.
I love the views you could get from up here. And I did have this digitally restored fairly recently, but there's Small World as well, and Dumbo spinning around there. And it's just very special to have run into this, of like them documenting my 2-year-old trip to Disneyland.
God, it makes me want to go back and see. Oh my God. So I'm curious if I have any Betamax stuff, because I recorded a ton on Betamax and then Sony Hi8. I'll have to go back and see if I can find some older stuff, because it's so cool seeing this.
Yeah. So anyway, I may not have been on the Skyway. I'm not entirely sure. Before it closed, I was definitely so small. I don't remember.
That is so fun.
Yeah. So do we want to talk about what happened to the Skyway? Not yet. Okay.
I gotta go to the 1980s.
Okay. Take us there. Oh no. Was he spending time on Holiday Hill?
Oh my God, no. This is so if you don't know who this is in the photo, it's former President Barack Obama. And in the 1980s, during my research, I found that he went to Disneyland as a college student. And him and his friends were smoking cigarettes on the Skyway after attending a Kool and the Gang concert, which you might be correct. It's probably closer to Holiday Hill than it was cigarettes. But he was apparently like 18 when this happened. But they got escorted out of the parks. And in a 2018 speech, Barack recalls, as we're coming into the station, there are these 2 very large Disneyland police officers, and they say, "Sir, can you come with us?" And they escorted us out of Disneyland. And Bob Iger responded to this, saying, "Well, he can always come back as long as he doesn't smoke."
I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So don't
Good.
smoke on the, and this is important too. You know how the Skyway buckets and then eventually the new refurbed 4 capacity ones, they're always open. And so there's a lot of reasons for why the Skyway eventually gets dismantled and disbanded. And there are rumors. Let's go and address the rumors before the actuality. So one of the rumors is that it's because kids were spitting and throwing pennies or objects off the Skyway buckets. That's true. That's a reality. That's a fact. But that was such a small minority of guests that wasn't really the major concern. And obviously, when they closed up the Matterhorn, that was a security thing. And they were really worried that, something falls on the track that could be a major, major safety issue. But so far, that's not the real reason. The other big one that Kate had alluded to earlier was the wheelchair accessibility, ADA. But the ADA isn't 100% true either, because since this was built before, if they really wanted to, and they still technically would be compliant because they would be grandfathered in to the old system. So if they didn't want to upgrade, build ramps, make it more accessible, they technically could have stuck around and stayed with it. So,
well, it's interesting. I have different information than you, I think.
I have the real reason why it went away was structural and not ADA related.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, another rumor that I had heard, if we're talking rumors, was one that goes around all the time is that a guest tried to jump out of this particular one.
It's not a rumor though.
Well, I mean,
that's not a rumor. Oh, can I tell the story? Let me tell the story. Okay. So I'm going to pull up a picture of what this looks like, because this would be your vantage point of, first of all, height and the attraction that is a part of this incident that occurs in the 90s. So Alice in Wonderland, for those that are listening, is what I pulled up right here. On April 17, 1994, a 30-year-old man fell 20 feet from the Disneyland Skyway gondola onto a tree near the Alice in Wonderland attraction. He sustained minor injuries, but later filed a $25,000 lawsuit claiming he fell accidentally. But before the trial, the man admitted to intentionally jumping, and therefore the lawsuit was dropped. Which is crazy, because you think 20 feet's no joke into a tree, but out of all times to fall, he was very specific with which moment, so he didn't fall the full 60 feet.
What year was that?
That was on April 17th, 1994.
Okay.
We
big
jumped
tree probably for Alice is what he probably fell on, because it wasn't there in these photos, but that was put in 1983 in that particular attraction.
I'm curious as to, so we don't know who this person was that fell. It was never reported on by news with specificity because of the lawsuit. But after he dropped it, again, because he dropped it, he was able to keep his anonymity. So, but minor injuries, dude. Dude jumped and was pretty much okay.
Yeah, I mean, liability is also a reason why we've seen a lot of other things go away, right? Like the stagecoaches with guests riding on top of the stagecoaches and whatnot, and the horses getting startled, and the axles breaking and the things overturning. Like that was one of the main reasons that we lost the stagecoaches. And the pack mules, same thing. We have a lot of things that if there's a lot of liability where guests could get hurt and Disney could get sued, we do see them eliminating attractions. So it's possible that was part of it. Bob Gurr said that the reason that the Skyway buckets closed was because the rules changed for what was allowed for attractions and it didn't comply. So that was his version of why. Again, likely the ADA requirements and compliance and financial was probably a combination of those, because the laws that were put in at this point made making improvements financially infeasible. Not that they couldn't, but it was just expensive. They didn't meet the safety codes for aerial tramways because this was the first aerial tramway in the nation. There were no rules when this was established. Like Kirk mentioned, it was kind of grandfathered in. But because the safety and laws came out that needed them to become into compliance for all these things, that would have required installing elevators and major modifications. And of course, the the sign, sorry, this ride does not accommodate wheelchairs, just like wouldn't cut it anymore. So
Yeah, I mean, basically what we're seeing is, here's the real truth. It costs too much, right? So like ADA is one portion of it, right? Because they probably would want to upgrade this, even though they could have probably passed and not had to. But the cost of an elevator, ramp systems, all of that would have been extremely costly. The other thing that I had was structural issues, particularly with one specific section. In the Matterhorn support towers, there was massive metal fatigue. So imagine you would have to make everything ADA compliant, plus the structural metal fatigue of the Matterhorn supports. But they obviously don't want to necessarily have to make those and do it repeatedly over time. So I think the thought process is, okay, well, we still need to make sure the Matterhorn stays open as an attraction. So we need to do that. We don't need to necessarily do the ADA compliance. And most of that budget gets reallocated to opening up what I think, you're going to hate me for this. I'm glad the Skyway left because Indiana Jones Adventure opens. And
but
I think the budget being allocated for Indy is better than the Skyway, even though I really love the Skyway.
okay, well, hold on. I will say, I want to talk about that. But before we get there, I want to say that they did try to figure out a way to reimagine this ride with the new rules. So they actually considered a new, larger system that would have 6-person cars that would be indoors. They would actually be climate controlled, both with heat and AC. So they would be completely enclosed like the ones Kirk showed you very early on here. They would make the trip faster. But the size of the buckets would have made them need to go around the Matterhorn, which would also have eliminated that stress on the Matterhorn structure itself. So I agree. I think there's a lot of evidence there for the, putting stress on that metal fatigue for the Matterhorn, I think was also part of the reason why it closed. And then they also considered having a third station in Critter Country. So they would have extended it across the park even farther, which I think would have been really fun to go over Rivers of America and whatnot. Although it would look weird storytelling wise to have it flying above, but it doesn't really fit in either way in front Fantasyland or Tomorrowland. So, it's fine. But a Disney spokesperson claimed in the Orange County Register, this is what they said about the closure. They said it was due to declining popularity, and the attraction staffing would needed to work on the upcoming Indiana Jones Adventure Temple of the Forbidden Eye, which opened in 1995. So Tony Baxter, what he had to say about it, he said, part of the dilemma with the Skyways was the cost of operating the park overall. Every time you add a new attraction like Indiana Jones, the cost of operating the park becomes more expensive. The result is a prevailing attitude that when something new opens up, something old should come down to offset the costs. And then park president Jack Lindquist, I think, agrees with Kirk because he said, I am glad the Skyway closed. It was an accident waiting to happen. Not quite.
I didn't say that. I don't really care about the safety thing because, honestly, no joke. I don't care about safety. What are you talking about? I grew up going on a Von Roll style gondola system at Six Flags Great Adventure, and it was so much fun. I love it. I don't know if it's still operating to today. I think it has been taken out, but I could be wrong. But I know that right now at Busch Gardens, I talked about this earlier, I had no idea I was riding a Von Roll system over Busch Gardens in Tampa. They have one still operating. It's great. The Sky Ride still is there, and it's like one of my favorite attractions. And right now, with all of the holiday lights on, it's awesome during Christmas time, or as they call it, Christmas Town. So I don't know. I like these systems. It goes over guests.
Wait,
you
is
could
that what you call
seriously
it, gondola?
Yeah, they do. Gondolas. Welcome to the gondola. As you set inside the gondola. Yeah, not gondolas, but the gondola. It's true.
I just have some random, really fun pictures from this of like people getting in and out of these things.
She's living the dream, dude.
She is. All right. Well, so then they decide to close this thing and then they start to demolish things. So the attraction supports in Tomorrowland Station were removed pretty shortly after its closure. The Matterhorn holes were sealed up, so that's why you don't see them anymore today. But the Fantasyland Station was pretty much there for a really long time. It stuck around until 2016, which is where we showed you those photos earlier of what it looked like. That's where we got them, was what it was just kind of hanging out. And then in May 11th of 2016, the city of Anaheim approved a permit to the Walt Disney Company for the demolition of the 5,132 square foot Skyway building, number 7301. And they demolished it because they needed to build Galaxy's Edge. That's the reason it went away. So they demolished it on June 14th of 2016. But you can still see the stairs for it if you go today. And if you're walking in Fantasyland, there is the right next to Casey Jr., there's a little planter there that just has flowers and stuff in it. That was where one of the pylons used to be that came out of the station. It was the first support tower outside of the station. And then if you walk a little bit further on the right-hand side, you'll see some steps that go to nowhere. That was the steps that went up to the Fantasyland station. The other remnant that is one of my favorite things is if you're standing in Mr. Toad's Wild Ride queue, and if you've ever wondered why the ride kind of goes around this weird corner where there's a planter in the middle of it, why can't the queue go through that? And that's because that's where the tower used to be as well for the Skyway when they built the attraction. So it's just now it's just a planter with a tree in it. But that's where one of the towers used to be as well. So little place where it used to be. There's a couple other places where you can still see it, some nods to it, because inside the Matterhorn itself, if you're on the ride, they repurpose some of the buckets as something that the abominable snowman has maybe mangled, and it's tucked into some of the snow inside. They have a bucket 13 that is inside there. So interestingly enough, I want to take us on a very, very tiny, short little rabbit hole. If we remember talking about the Discovery Bay project, you remember that, Kirk, right? With Tony Baxter and oh man, here's good old Tony Baxter right there. The Discovery Bay concept had a ride that was inspired by the Skyway, which was called Professor Marvel's Balloon Descent, and it looked like this. So if you remember, this land was all kind of steampunk themed everything. So you can see the little balloons. This is just from the model. So this.
Can I just tell you something? I feel like you could write a book on the Skyway. I feel like this is insane.
I did a lot of research for this. The little balloons there. This would have connected the steampunk Discovery Bay with a proposed Dumbo Circus expansion of Fantasyland. And it would have been themed to a hot air balloons run by Professor Marvel, who, of course, was later renamed Dreamfinder into Journey of Imaginations. That's where we get Dreamfinder from. So the balloon concept, Discoveryland, none of that ever happened. We've talked about that before. But the balloon concept actually did travel to Epcot. And it became an early one for Listen to the Land, which became Living with the Land later, where you would take a balloon ride through all of the seasons, the 4 seasons and the biomes. And of course, this changed to a boat ride after Kraft became a sponsor. But the idea of a Skyway type kind of aerial balloon ride going through something was an early concept for Listen to the Land.
Luckily, we still get the 4-season balloons in the lobby, because I feel like that's a good trade-off.
Right.
But you do get them, and they don't even move up and down anymore, but they used to move when I was a kid.
I know.
And I do love the subtle detail, but I do love when you're looking into the land pavilion from up above and you're looking at Sunshine Seasons, how each one of the seating areas is themed to one of the seasons. Most people, when you're on the ground floor, it's too much like trees for the forest, not forest for the trees. So when you're elevated and you're walking through the land pavilion in Epcot, please look down first and notice all the different seasons. It's one of my favorite little specialty things that everyone ignores. Nobody cares.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So what Kirk is mentioning is if you're standing in the lobby and you're looking up at the ceiling, you'll see 4 hot air balloons. That is a nod to that original concept, which originated with the Skyway, though. So I love that connection is there with that. So I wanted to make sure to mention that before we move on. So do you have anything else about Disneyland's before we move forward there, Kirk?
Let me check my notes. Oh, I do. I have one more thing. I've got this Skyway bucket. So in July 2023, actor Seth Green, you know, the guy from Family Guy and Austin Powers, acquired a piece of Disneyland history when he purchased a Skyway bucket, a gondola from the park's aerial lift attraction. This was part of a classic Disneyland item curated auction by America's Toy Scout, Joel McGee, at the Van Eaton Galleries in Burbank. Green secured the Skyway bucket for $72,500.
Oof.
And he was very excited about getting it, but I was trying to find like quotes or anything from him from that day, but this is the exact Skyway bucket that he bought. What is he doing with it? I imagine he's sitting at home going, no, if you had a lot of money,
his camera to out.
Dude, if you had a lot of money, you just do one of those rooms that's like 360 with all the, you know, like build a circle theater and then take like your Betamax footage or somebody else's and boom, like put that up, make it a reality, and you could pretend that you're on the Skyway again.
If I had money, I would just get a whole bunch of these and then just make my own in my massive backyard. Just have my own.
Yeah.
I get the original buckets though with the patio.
You'd have to call Von Roll Up and be like, hey, actually, you know what? You're probably the cheapest way to do this would probably be to find one that's defunct. I have a friend who, no joke, buys like trinkets from broken or dismantled rides. So like anytime something announces that they're closing, he'll call up the demolition crew and be like, hey, what are you doing with the parts? And he'll like buy stuff from like a brake system or a wheel, or it's crazy. I'm like, I didn't even know you could do that. And because it's all getting demoed, they sell it for cheap. So like things that would be $4,000 to $5,000, you could get for like $100.
Wow, that's
insane.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, before we move on to Walt Disney World, it is time for our favorite segment of the show that we all love, which is talking about...
Sell with me tonight. Sell out with me. Oh, yeah. We're going to tell you about all the stuff we sell, and we want you to buy it so we can keep doing this.
So, yeah, we're going to just take a very quick mention of some of the things that we're working on. Kirk, you have a couple of things going on over there at Walrus Carp. What do you got?
Yeah, you know, I'm just going to talk about the hoodie in honor of, this is just kind of apropos, in honor of the Yeti over in Disneyland and the Skyway that would be able to see a nod to the Yeti, which is kind of cool that you kind of barely saw him when you went through the Matterhorn. We have, for the holiday season, a puff printed walrus Yeti, our little frosted Yeti, and he's like he's textured, so like you can feel all the little.
You can feel your Yeti.
So yeah, you can get that at walruscarp.com, free shipping in the US. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, you too could feel your own Yeti. It's cool though. I really do love that. The sweatshirt. I think you did a great job with that one.
Yeah, it came out nice.
So I'm still celebrating the release of my new book, still riding that high over here at Disney Cicerone. So I have Who the Mirror Reflects is a story about two Disney history-loving cast members who find each other in the reflection of the rivers of America. But basically when they have a lot of internal struggles that pull them apart from each other and things they have to go through. But it is interwoven with Disney history, a really good romantic story, romantic tale if you're into that. But it rocks you right into that. Sets you right into Walt Disney World. It will drop you in there if you just need to go in your brain to the Disney parks for a little while and escape. I know, Kirk, you've been listening to the audiobook version too, kind of previewing it, which I'm about halfway through recording, and it should be hopefully out before the end of the year is my goal on Audible. So you can get this on Amazon is where all my books are available. To search for Disney Cicerone or Kate Grasso and it'll pop right up, as well as all the rest of the books in the Pixie Dust in the Parks series. So
yeah,
you enjoying it so far?
It's awful, dude. It's the worst. No, it's amazing, dude. I love it. The thing about all of these things, and I mean this sincerely, there isn't a series for young adult all the way up to us geriatrics that's like you feel so age appropriate. Do you know what I'm saying? Like most stories about Disney run into two factions. It's either 100% nonfiction, which is I would say 95%, and then it's 5% or 4% is like youth, young child books.
Yeah,
And
no.
so this 1%, that Kate is bringing to light is for all of us Disney adults and people who enjoy things like live streaming and these stories, these romantic stories about live streamers. It's really, really interesting. And it's fun because it interweaves not only an epic narrative, but it also has components of Kate's, which are these enjoyable historical synopses woven through a romantic narrative. And I just think it's beautifully well done. I'm biased and like the ones that take place in Walt Disney World versus Disneyland's, but they're great. I love the books.
Thank you. Yeah, my goal is also to let us think critically and deeply about some of the things in the Disney parks, that maybe make you see the parks in a new way that you've never seen them before. That's definitely a goal with any book that I write and any content I make, truthfully, is to give you a deeper understanding about why we love the parks the way we do.
Yeah, I mean, tonight we spent time looking at oscillating railings. So,
hey, they were pretty cool, though. Not gonna lie.
I think they're pretty cool. I think all this stuff, again, I always feel like on a baseline, the most linear, tiniest little dip your toe in the water is if somebody's in the parks with their family or friends and they say something that they learned from Distory or our content. And I just think that is such a fun thing to be like, oh my God, did you know? And we don't care. You don't have to give us credit. That's fine. You can be the smart person in the room.
That's right. All right. So that being said, let's head on over to the Magic Kingdom Skyway in Walt Disney World, which opened with the park in 1971 and went Fantasyland to Tomorrowland, just like Disneyland. So they pretty much took the same concept and they just plug and played it into Walt Disney World. I did find a really fun poster for it, though. It's the Skyway, kind of a vintage poster.
I have to admit, it's not as fun. As somebody who's Walt Disney World's like the fanfare, because it's plug and play, it's not as exciting as there's not as much historical excitement as there was with the Disneyland version because it was groundbreaking.
It did have a unique feature, though, that Disneyland did not have, in that it had a turn station in it. So there was an L-shaped turn that looked like this.
Sadly, there was only one turntable and no microphones.
I also found that the Fantasyland one had, so you guys might be familiar with this view of this walkway with Peter Pan on one side and Small World on the other, and you can see where the pylon used to be for this, so that the tower used to be, and then there was a little area down below it that would surround it. But there was one that was further over that we can still see today. Like if you are in Fantasyland and you see the concrete change to like this cobblestone area, there's that is where one of these support towers used to be as well. And there used to be like a fountain at the bottom of it. Kirk, did you find anything about this?
I did not find anything out about the fountain.
It was really interesting because I only saw it in like one picture. It's shocking to me how, here it is. See this little fountain at the bottom of that?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's like this little landscaped concrete area with a little fountain that no longer exists. Do you want to talk about this a little bit from what you're seeing there, Kirk?
This freaks me out because what we're looking at is here's Peter Pan's the downwards left, upper left is Columbia Harbor House and the seating area that Kate likes to hide at. So now you know. And leading into... And then Memento Mori is on the right. What's fun about this is now you get a view. Most people know this area as the tangled bathrooms area. So this weaving serpentine stair or ramp leads into where this Fantasyland station was. But all of this is now a water and a walkway that connects to the Haunted Mansion and has that tangled bathroom area. And then the seating area / charging station would be in the center of what it is today, which includes the Pascal hide and seek.
And this area was themed like Disneyland, like a Swiss chalet. So very, very similar vibes to Disneyland's one. And it did have this like the winding queue, the bridge over a stream, which they did incorporate into the Tangled area. So if you're there and you see lots of bridges and then like all the water features and the streams that are going by, they incorporated that into the design specifically to honor the legacy of the Skyway station that they replaced with the Tangled bathroom, the Tangled tower, and all those kinds of things. And interestingly enough, the Tangled bathrooms also have shapes to their design that are very much have German influences, just like what we see here. So if you're looking at the bathrooms, which I didn't pull up a picture of, you'll see that there's some of the influences in architecture that they use for the Tangled bathrooms are actually pulled directly from this Skyway station.
What I'm curious about, Kate, is what is Dopey doing here? Do you think that's like a little, is that like for ride heights? Oh, it was a meet and greet.
They did actually like a meet and greet area. So after they closed the station, they used this as like stroller parking and character meet and greet for a while, until 2011, which is when they destroyed the station for the new Fantasyland overhaul. So yeah, Dopey's hanging out there because it was a character meet and greet.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Over in the Tomorrowland station on the other side, really interesting thing here is that it was 2 levels. So it was 2 stories, with the first level as a bathroom and the second level as the station. And it was stylized white building with a waterfall feature, which tied into all the rest of the design for Tomorrowland at this point in time. If you remember, Tomorrowland used to have these 2 gigantic waterfalls that were in these white spires that were outside of Tomorrowland as you walked in at this point in time. So they designed a waterfall also into the design of this particular version. So you can see here, there's a waterfall out front. And then
it looks like the same exact waterfall as they have in Epcot outside the Imagination Pavilion, even though that one shoots up. It's like similar as it's just basically cement.
It's just like falling over a wall. That's pretty well it is. Exactly. And it does have, it does seem to have some influences from the Disneyland design, and it looks like the ceiling is floating.
Yeah, it's set of flat ceiling.
Mm-hmm. So it does seem that they took some influences from that. But there's not a whole lot to say about it. It's pretty much just a big white building beyond that.
I don't know, color-wise it matches the People Mover. It's that, again, it's that like slate gray, white, and that iconic People Mover blue. So
yeah,
that's what we got.
I mean, it matches the vibes of, that Tomorrowland of that era. So it makes sense. This station, known as the Skyway to Fantasyland, it did have an accident at one point in 1999. There was a cast member who was swept off of the station. And his name was Raven Barlow. He was a part-time custodian. And sadly, someone turned on the ride without knowing that he was standing in the path of the ride vehicles. And he was swept from the platform by an elevated cable car. And he held on for a little while, but he fell 40 feet onto a flower bed because he thought that maybe it would be the safest place to land. And unfortunately, he did not survive that. So that same year, the Skyway actually does close in 1999, but they say it didn't have anything to do with this particular accident. It was just low capacity, expensive to operate. That's usually the reasons given for why it closed, and not this particular incident. But yeah, very, very sad that he passed away from that. And it was just truly just an accident. Somebody was not following the safety protocol of, checking to make sure nobody was there before he left.
Kate, how cool is this RCA sign above Space Mountain?
Yeah, because they were trying to figure out a way for RCA to sponsor something in the park. And so when they were building Space Mountain, they're like, this is the perfect fit for that. And that's also where we get Nipper in the little...
I know, dude, you got to tie this together.
Little Dog Nipper was in a UFO in the queue as well, because of RCA, because he was the sponsor for that. But yeah, that was the RCA sponsor was there for a long time. I did find a little chart of what this looked like. Here's the Tomorrowland station you see at the bottom, and then the Space Mountain entrance to the right. And then you can see that the turn station goes right over the Tomorrowland Speedway, sorry. And then there's the Transpo station.
Yeah, your Disneyland showing.
It goes past the teacups, and then over to, you'll see Dumbo, and then this has the carousel on the left side, Small World on the right, and then into Fantasyland Station. So I love the little diagram, kind of gives you a direct path of exactly where it went.
The other thing, I have an image pulled up. Do you remember when we had the Tomorrowland Light and Power, and that was like our Space Mountain gift shop? It's now the Tron gift shop. Mm-hmm. Well, this one's kind of cool because you can see where Tron is now existing, and you can still see the People Mover track, but you get an idea of where the pathway for the Skyway actually went. It was more to the right. It like didn't go over guests. Can you pull up that your map again? Yeah, so like you can see that clear distinction right over the Speedway, which honestly would probably make the Speedway more interesting to have something to look at versus like what we look at now. I mean, I guess you get Tron and
more interesting.
You're so not wrong. There's nothing I could say about that.
I also have this one that's really fun that goes over Dumbo, and you can see the lagoon there for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's still there.
Oh yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
That's really pretty composition too.
So do you want to talk about what's left of the Skyway today in Walt Disney World there, Kirk?
Yeah, so honestly, there's not a whole heck of a lot because if you look at the Fantasyland Swiss area, that got transformed into Tangled, which I'm going to stand on a soapbox for less than 10 seconds.
Okay.
You're going to hate this. Small World is better in Disneyland.
Sure.
And gets an overlay for the holidays, and it's absolutely incredible, and it actually has characters from the countries.
Yeah.
Ours in Walt Disney World is really lame.
Yeah.
Turn it into a Tangled boat ride, make the whole entire area Tangled.
I don't know if I hate that.
Oh, a win. I'll call that a win.
I mean, because I really don't like that version of Small World. I love I agree. Mary Blair. I love Joyce Charleston. I love Alice Davis. I love all the people that worked on it, but I think that one is terrible.
If you compare it to Disneyland's, and the fact that it has an exterior section, they do production shows, they have the holiday overlay, they have the characters in the countries, it is so infinitely beyond the one that is in Walt Disney World that I think it's just let the best be the best and just take something that honestly would be very much plussed if it was rethemed to Tangled.
Yeah, I'm not usually one to eliminate history like that, but I really don't like
That's
that.
not history. That's like not even a good carbon copy.
It's really bad. I think, honestly, there's so many things that they could bring back. Like those concepts of the Mary Poppins ride that they didn't have there, the Sleepy Hollow ride that they were going to have there. Like, there's so many things that Fantasyland, even after the remodel, needs so much help. Like, it's missing as big areas where there's like attractions that people hardly ever go to or don't really, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Ariel's so far in the back that nobody bothers most of the time. Like, at most, it gets to like 35. And then the beginning, first like 3 hours of the day, and then the last like 6 hours of the day at Magic Kingdom, 5-10 minutes max. And I love that because it's a great dark ride, but it's so far in the back. It often gets ignored, but it's got great high capacity. It's an awesome attraction. It's got iconic songs. It's fantastic. Everything about it is great. And I feel still blessed that we got the new Fantasyland that we did in Disney World, because my goodness, if we got a bunch of meet and greets only, what they were planning on doing, like Pixie Hollow and all, no. So luckily we got that.
Well, I still say that they need a Cinderella ride, a Cinderella dark ride, where Princess Fairy Tale Hall is. Like,
I agree. Put us in a pumpkin and make the pumpkin turn into a coach during part of the attraction. Let's go.
Writes itself. Come on.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a couple other places you can find Skyway remnants in Walt Disney World today, besides the cobblestone areas in the walkway that I talked about in Fantasyland. In Space Mountain, obviously, the bathrooms near Space Mountain, that is the lower half of the Skyway station. They just took the top off and left the bottom. And so you can go to the Skyway bathrooms if you want to in Tomorrowland. There's also at the Space Mountains exit, if you look on those little like control console panels there's a closed route that's listed as TLSK2FL, which is code for Tomorrowland Skyway to Fantasyland. So there's a little nod to the closed route there. Then also in the Skipper Canteen, we've talked about this in our Jungle Cruise series. There's a book called A View from Above by S.W. Buckets. So there's it's on the shelf in the secret hallway to the secret meeting room. There's a book there about the Skyway buckets. And then also Disney Springs, I've heard in the Disney Style Store. I haven't seen it myself. Maybe you have, Kirk, but there's a hanging gondola that is up in the ceiling of the Disney Style Store in Disney Springs. So the store looks like that. Oh, there you have it there. And that is, you can want to see one in person, but you can't get in it as it's in the ceiling.
Yeah, it hangs right above a teacup ride vehicle, which you actually can get in and take photos. But it's right above that. Almost everybody ignores the Skyway gondola because they're staring at the teacup and sitting inside it. Nobody looks up.
Obviously, the biggest nod to the Skyway is the iteration of the Skyliner, which we're not going to get in the history of. We're out of time for this episode, and it's really quite new, so there's not a lot of history there.
It's 2019, bro. It's too early. Like, come see us at like 2045. That's like a perfect time for us to actually discuss the Skyliner.
Yeah. But I mean, I think we do have to mention it, the fact that the reason we have this Skyliner
does
is because of it. It's there, and we have the turn station, like there was a turn station in, Tomorrowland. Like, we have those kinds of things. So
it is a cool nod to Walt Disney too, because if you go all the way back to the beginning of this and talking about how Walt wanted gondolas or thought that gondolas would be a good transportation of the future, it ends up, I think, being fairly accurate that the Skyliner is actually my favorite mode of transportation in all of Walt Disney World. I like the monorails, don't like the smell of the monorails. I like the monorails, love the ferry boat when I'm coming into Magic Kingdom, don't like the ferry boat leaving, but that's a capacity crowd thing. And I don't know. To me, I think the Skyliner is just such a beautiful way to see the parks and the resorts. And it's, I think it's very highly functional, great capacity. And it's an enjoyable experience, whether it's warm out or cold out. They're comfortable. I just wish, let's build it from studios and rip it straight to Animal Kingdom. It's a straight shot. Let's do it. Because Animal Kingdom needs more than just buses.
Yeah. They need to expand the Skyliner multiple places. I agree 100%. And it's interesting though that reading through this and learning that they were planning ones that sat 6 people and were indoors, and I guess they were climate controlled, which the Skyliner is not, but having those that they were going to put in Disneyland, but that's what they ended up doing at Disney World. It's like interesting to see how that idea, even though it didn't end up in Disneyland, it still got carried over and got put into a different use in Disney World. I think is really interesting to me.
I think it was logical, smart, and I think the way that it gets utilized is fantastic.
Although I think it's interesting they didn't make them climate controlled, which I think everybody's scared about.
I'm going to be honest with you. They don't need it. You're whipping pretty good, and as there's always a breeze. So
yeah, as long as you don't stop. Well, if you stop on a hot day and you're for extended period of time, it gets a little toasty in there. But otherwise, it's pretty good.
The only thing I always tell people is use the restroom. There's always a restroom right before getting on the Skyliner. Use it because you never know.
Yeah. Well, that being said, do we have any final thoughts here as we wrap up our Skyway discussion there, Kirk?
Make sure, kids, when you are hanging around looking at park maps, always look for pictorial weenies.
I'm never going to unsee that when I look at park maps now. I'm getting weird in my head. All right. Well, shall we wrap it up then?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this episode of Distory. We hope you enjoyed digging into the history of the Skyway, where we got to go up above the world and fly just like a tea tray in the sky. So this was a really, really fun discussion of really seeing how this idea went from just Walt really wanting something, not knowing where it was going to go, putting it in the parks, how it evolved, how it got transferred to Walt Disney World, and how we have it as also today. So thank you for joining us for this discussion. We hope that it was enlightening for you and brought back some maybe fun memories of going on the Skyway. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you next time for Distory.